You know you're invisible when people start talking about your work like you died. That thought hit me one morning as I sat alone in the corner of the Nexora cafeteria, watching a group of younger engineers gather around Leo, the company's shiny new favorite. He was enthusiastically explaining how his team had optimized the data parsing layer in our flagship product, DataPulse. I smiled bitterly into my coffee. That layer? I had written it 12 years ago, from scratch, during a Thanksgiving break while my peers were vacationing in Aspen. But no one looked in my direction. They hadn't for a while now. My name is Scarlett Hale. I'm 56 years old, a senior architect at Nexora Analytics, and for the past 18 years I've been the quiet force behind the company's most valuable asset, the distributed architecture that powers DataPulse, the software used by over 500 companies worldwide to analyze financial risk in real time, or at least, I was. When I joined Nexora, we were 6 people in a damp basement in Cincinnati. The walls leaked, the Wi-Fi barely worked, but we had vision, and I had code. I built the first version of our real-time processing engine during those brutal, sleep-deprived months. I remember pushing the final build at 3 a.m. with my infant daughter asleep in a sling across my chest. That code later evolved into the backbone of DataPulse, the very product that pulled us out of obscurity and into the big leagues. Back then, they called me the brain of Nexora. Now, I was just Scarlett from R&D. It started slowly, the way corporate ghosting always does. Invitations to product meetings stopped arriving. My name disappeared from internal newsletters. My direct reports were reassigned for better alignment. One week, my office was moved to a smaller, windowless room to optimize space. The writing was on the wall. I just refused to read it. Then came Chad Ingram, Nexora's newly appointed CEO, barely 36, with a Stanford MBA and a love for buzzwords. He spoke in phrases like synergy mapping and youth-forward culture. The board loved him. Investors adored him. And it didn't take long before he made it clear. He wanted to modernize Nexora, starting with leadership. I wasn't blind. I saw what was coming, but what I didn't expect was how fast they would come for me. On a rainy Tuesday in March, I got a calendar invite titled Restructure Alignment, HR and Executive Sync. Just the subject line alone gave me a headache. But I went, and I dressed professionally, because that's what women my age do. We show up, even when we know the room isn't built for us anymore. The conference room was bright, too bright. Chad was there, flanked by Melinda from HR. Both were wearing the same expression, polite regret, with a sprinkle of practiced empathy. Scarlett, Chad began, folding his hands. I want to start by thanking you for your incredible contributions over the years. What you've done here is nothing short of foundational. I didn't flinch, he continued, but as you know, Nexora is evolving. Our next phase requires a fresh, agile approach, something that better resonates with where the market is heading, which is why, after careful consideration, we're sunsetting the senior architect role. Your position will be impacted as of end of month. I nodded. I expected this. Melinda chimed in. We've prepared a generous exit package, 6 months salary, health coverage through the end of Q3, and career coaching services. 6 months. 18 years. A 3-to-1 ratio. How generous. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Chad. He couldn't meet my eyes. What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment for months. They thought they were playing chess, but I'd already flipped the board. And I was just getting started. The day after the meeting, I arrived at the office precisely at 8:15 a.m., just like I had for the past 18 years. Not a minute late. Not a day missed. Even during the worst of times, the flu, a sprained ankle, my mother's chemotherapy schedule, I showed up. But that morning, my access badge gave a small mechanical beep. Access denied. I stood outside the glass door of the R&D wing, blinking at the red light. 10 seconds later, Leo, the young engineer I once mentored, walked up. He hesitated. Hey Dr. Hale, let me buzz you in. He didn't look me in the eye. No one had since the announcement. Inside, I found my nameplate already removed. A plastic rectangle sat blank on my door. My inbox had been cleared of all engineering discussions. The new Slack channel for DataPulse X, the next-gen version I had proposed 6 months ago, was locked behind admin permissions. I wasn't invited. I had officially become a ghost. By noon, the news had spread. Chad had announced leadership realignment in his all-hands video, using phrases like bold evolution and agile expertise. He never mentioned my name, not once. That afternoon, I got a message from Rita, an intern I had helped hire last year. "Dr. Hale, I just wanted to say thank you. Your mentorship meant everything to me. I'm sorry for what they're doing." I replied with a simple, "Keep building. Your code speaks louder than titles." But the sting was real. I had built DataPulse from the ground up. Not just the architecture, the principles behind it, the trust it inspired, the stability that brought in multi-million-dollar clients. Every feature they bragged about at conferences was rooted in something I had once stayed up at 3 a.m. to debug. Now, they were stripping my name off of it like peeling off a sticker. I overheard it in the break room 2 days later. Chad, speaking to investors on a call, DataPulse X is a full in-house rebuild led by our new gen team. We've moved past legacy structures. Legacy structures. That's what I was now. Not a person, not a mind, a structure, something to be moved past. It wasn't just insulting, it was calculated. On Friday, I walked past the third-floor conference room and saw a slide deck projected on the wall titled IPO Narrative, Nexora 2025. I paused. Leo was presenting to the board, walking them through a timeline of innovation milestones. He pointed at a flowchart I knew by heart because I had drawn it 2 years ago on a whiteboard in my office. My handwriting was still faintly visible in the scanned image they used. He never mentioned me. No one did. But the worst came Monday morning. I received a manila envelope from legal, hand-delivered to my desk by an intern who looked terrified. It contained a revised NDA and IP reassignment form, with a sticky note that read, "For HR compliance, please sign and return by EOW." The document stated that all versions and iterations of DataPulse, including any components conceptualized during employment, whether directly implemented or not, were property of Nexora Analytics. It was clear what they were trying to do. They wanted my silence, my signature, my erasure. I took the envelope, walked into the restroom, and stood there for several minutes, alone, under harsh fluorescent lights, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. For the first time in a long while, I felt old. Not weak, but worn down, like a machine that had run too many hours without rest. But then I remembered something. The current version of DataPulse X, the one they were planning to launch with the IPO, wasn't entirely built at Nexora. I had written significant portions of its new architecture at home on weekends using my personal laptop, after the company refused to fund my prototype. And I had kept everything, every file, every version history, every notebook, every timestamp, every Git commit linked to my private repository, separate from Nexora's system. Documented, dated, and backed up. The patent for that version, still pending, under my name. They thought I was just another legacy to retire quietly. But they'd forgotten the one rule every good engineer knows: never underestimate the person who built the foundation you're standing on. And I hadn't even begun to shake the ground. The following week, Nexora held an internal town hall. Chad's latest effort to galvanize morale as the company approached its IPO launch window. I wasn't planning to attend. But then an anonymous email landed in my inbox. Subject line, "You should see what they're presenting." Attached was a screenshot of a PowerPoint slide titled, "The Evolution of DataPulse, a Next-Gen Journey." The caption below the timeline read, "Initial groundwork established by early contributors, current innovation driven by the 2024 engineering leadership cohort." No names, no credits, no mention of the woman who had architected the entire damn system. That woman being me. I showed up to the town hall, standing quietly in the back of the auditorium with my arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Leo was on stage, crisp white shirt, wireless mic clipped to his collar, sleeves rolled up just enough to look ambitious. He smiled like he belonged there. He was walking the audience through the story of DataPulse X. My story. "And here's where we restructured the parsing framework," he said, pointing to a diagram I had literally drawn on my dining room table 6 months ago. "This shift is what gives us the 42% increase in real-time data throughput." Applause followed. Not a single word about me. Someone, an intern maybe, raised a hand. "Wasn't that parsing model developed by Dr. Hale originally?" Leo chuckled politely. "Scarlett laid the early groundwork, sure, but the current architecture was reimagined by our new gen team. It's a full in-house rebuild. I stood there frozen, heart pounding. People turned to look at me in the back, some sympathetic, some curious, some avoiding eye contact altogether. I left before the Q&A. That evening, I sat on my couch, lights off, just the soft hum of my air purifier in the background. I stared at the manila folder still sitting on my coffee table, the one they wanted me to sign, the one that would officially relinquish everything I had built. And I thought of Leo. 2 years ago, he was a fresh graduate from Carnegie Mellon. Brilliant, but green, overwhelmed by the scale of the system. I'd taken him under my wing, taught him how to clean up legacy code, how to write clean logic that scaled under pressure. I'd even rewritten his buggy SQL module the night before his first big demo, without telling anyone so he wouldn't be embarrassed. Now he stood on stage, discrediting me like I was a museum relic. That's when I made the decision. I opened my laptop and pulled up the private Git repo where Datapulse X Gen 3 lived. Every commit timestamped, every architectural sketch scanned, every note logged in my personal cloud. The system they were preparing to sell to investors wasn't just mine, it only existed because of me. Nexora had made a critical mistake. They assumed that since I worked for them, everything I touched belonged to them. But corporate law, especially intellectual property law, has a few nuances they'd overlooked. Especially the clause buried deep in my original employment contract, dated 2006, back when Nexora was nothing but a 6-person startup. Any intellectual property developed outside of company hours and without the use of company resources shall remain the sole ownership of the employee, unless otherwise contracted. I had never signed an updated agreement, and every line of Datapulse X Gen 3 had been written at my home, on my own hardware, during nights and weekends. When they'd refused to fund the prototype, I'd kept building anyway, out of habit, out of obsession, out of love for the craft. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had legally left the door wide open. The next day, I contacted Weller & Hughes, a boutique IP law firm recommended by an old college friend. I walked them through everything, the source code, the timelines, the design docs. They were stunned. "You've documented this better than most of our corporate clients," said Amelia Hughes, partner and lead counsel. "You have a rock-solid case." She got to work immediately. By Thursday, my provisional patent filing was complete. By Friday, I had a meeting scheduled with Silix Data, Nexora's largest competitor. And by the following Monday, Nexora still had no idea what was coming. They were busy prepping for Investor Day, polishing their new narrative about youth, agility, and reinvention. Chad was quoted in Tech Capital Weekly saying, "We're moving forward with the kind of leadership that understands how to adapt fast and leave outdated methods behind." I clipped the quote, saved it in a folder on my desktop labeled Fuel, because soon they'd realize what outdated really meant, and I wouldn't need a mic or a spotlight, just proof, silence, and the law. I spent the weekend tying every loose end. Every version of my code was backed up to an encrypted drive. Every note, diagram, test result, even the bug logs, were timestamped, archived, and organized by date. I updated the provisional patent file, added a technical appendix, and made sure the chain of custody for my work was airtight. By Monday morning, I was no longer a woman who had been pushed out. I was an inventor with legal standing, a strategy, and leverage that could shake a company's foundation. But I didn't show it. I showed up to work exactly as they expected me to. Quiet, compliant, already fading out of the picture. I smiled when I passed Chad in the hallway. He gave me a brief nod, already preoccupied with IPO prep. I was no longer on his radar. That was good. Let them think I'd accepted defeat. Let them relax. Let them slip. Melinda from HR stopped by later that afternoon with a neutral expression and a clipboard. "Just following up, Scarlett. Have you had a chance to review the exit documents?" "I'm going through them," I said pleasantly. "Just wanted to make sure I understand everything before signing." She nodded approvingly. "Take your time. We just need them by Friday." I smiled again. Friday was perfect. That evening, I met with Avi Sarkar, CTO of Silix Data, at a quiet rooftop bar overlooking downtown. He'd reached out through Amelia at the law firm. Turns out they'd been watching Nexora closely for months. And when my name surfaced in connection with the Datapulse architecture, their interest turned into opportunity. We've always admired your system's efficiency, Avi said, sipping his espresso. And frankly, if we can offer a better version, developed and licensed through its actual creator, that gives us a hell of a market edge. I'm not interested in revenge, I said calmly. I'm interested in control and recognition. You'll have both, Avi replied. We'll structure the licensing deal to reflect your sole inventorship. Your name will be on everything, and we'll move quickly. Nexora won't see it coming. By Wednesday, we had a signed intent to license. The full contract was in motion, and Celix's legal team was already preparing a press release, one that would drop the following week, aligned precisely with Nexora's IPO media cycle. Back at the office, I continued my performance. I cleared out my desk one drawer at a time. I smiled at the junior engineers. I gave Leo a LinkedIn endorsement when he asked. When Melinda checked in again on Thursday, I handed her the signed NDA, except I had redlined 2 key clauses and initialed the changes. She didn't notice. HR rarely does. I spent Thursday afternoon drafting what looked like transition documentation. In reality, it was a detailed paper trail, one that would later prove I had cooperated fully, handed over company-owned materials, and kept nothing proprietary. I even left a list of questions for the next architect to consider, subtle hints about potential system flaws I'd already fixed in my personal version of the engine. They'd waste weeks chasing those issues. Friday came fast. As I walked out of the building for what they assumed was the last time, I paused at the entrance and looked back. Nexora's logo gleamed across the glass facade, polished and pristine. I thought of all the nights I'd spent there, all the holidays missed, all the birthdays I'd worked through. I thought of Chad standing at the all-hands meeting, smiling as he erased my name from the company's narrative. And I thought, you have no idea what's coming. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a scene. I just walked away. But I wasn't leaving quietly. I was walking toward something louder than any speech, stronger than any resignation letter. I was walking toward the reckoning. The morning of Nexora's IPO media briefing, the company was glowing with self-congratulation. Their press team had crafted sleek announcements, their pitch deck was polished, and Chad was already making calls to venture capitalists with the same smug certainty he wore like cologne. At exactly 8 a.m., their official press release hit the wires. At 8:03 a.m., mine did. Celix Data announces exclusive licensing deal with Dr. Cryer, Scarlett Hale, inventor of the next-generation DataPulse architecture. The headline ran across Tech Insider, Business Code, and 3 other major tech media outlets. It included the patent filing number, details of the agreement, and the following statement. The technology underpinning DataPulse X was developed independently by Dr. Hale, outside the scope of her employment at Nexora. Celix Data now holds exclusive rights to commercialize, expand, and integrate the architecture across multiple sectors. By 8:10 a.m., Twitter was on fire. By 8:15, Nexora's legal team had called an emergency meeting. I was in my new office at Celix, sipping dark roast coffee and watching the chaos unfold in real time. My inbox pinged with subject lines like, "What's going on with your patent? Urgent, Scarlett Hale press release? Call me ASAP, serious conflict." At 8:27 a.m., my old team lead, Daniel, texted, "Scarlett, what the hell did you just do? Chad's office is in meltdown." At 8:35, I received an email from Chad himself. Subject, urgent, let's talk. Scarlett, there seems to be a serious misunderstanding regarding your patent filing and the Celix deal. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Chad, I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to my attorneys with a single line, "Let them talk to him." By 9 a.m., 3 major tech blogs had picked up the story. One headline read, Nexora's IPO undermined by IP crisis. Former architect strikes licensing deal with rival. At 9:22, Celix posted an official clarification to social media. All commercial use of Dr. Hale's patented framework now requires a licensing agreement with Celix Data. And then came the real blow. At 10 a.m., I was interviewed live on Tech Talk Weekly, the most widely syndicated podcast in our industry. I sat across from host Lena Morales, composed, confident, and finally heard. "Scarlett," Lena asked, "why now?" I looked straight into the camera. Because I was written out of a story I helped build. Because innovation without attribution is theft. and because the next generation of engineers deserves to see what it looks like when someone stands their ground. The clip went viral. Back at Nexora, the fallout was brutal. Their legal team scrambled to dissect my employment agreement, only to find the same clause I'd quietly kept in my back pocket for 18 years. The one that protected inventions created off hours and outside company resources. And since Nexora had refused to invest in my Gen 3 prototype, all documented development had happened on my own time, on my own machine. At 11:45 a.m., their IPO launch event was postponed indefinitely. Chad, once the golden boy of disruption, now looked like a man trying to stop a forest fire with a glass of water. Insiders leaked reports that investors were threatening to pull out. Journalists began digging into Nexora's internal culture. Some even started asking why the company's most valuable technology had no named inventor in their IPO filings. And then came the investor call. Celix's CEO, alongside Avi, their CTO, introduced me as Chief Technology Advisor and formally presented the roadmap to deploy my architecture across a suite of new enterprise products. We're not just licensing the technology, Avi said. We're building around the mind that created it. I couldn't have written a better statement myself. Back in my inbox, the tone had shifted. Emails from junior engineers, women in tech, and even a few Nexora employees began flooding in. Some offered congratulations. Others apologized. One said simply, "I watched them erase you. I'm glad you made them remember." By the end of the day, Celix's stock rose 11%. Nexora's dropped 14%. But for me, the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was that my name, the one they tried to scrub from history, was now everywhere. And this time, they couldn't take it back. I didn't need revenge. I had something better. Credit. By the following Monday, the board of directors at Nexora called an emergency executive session. Chad didn't show up on time. Rumor had it he'd spent the weekend in closed-door meetings with legal teams and PR firms, trying to salvage his image. It didn't matter. The damage was already public. Tech Finance Daily ran a front-page headline: IPO implosion, Nexora's leadership in crisis after IP scandal. Business Broadcast Network followed with a panel of analysts dissecting Nexora's gross mishandling of proprietary attribution and the culture of age-based erasure that now haunted its internal reputation. Investors withdrew. 2 enterprise clients paused their contracts. Startups backed by Nexora's venture arm distanced themselves publicly. And then came the hammer. At precisely 10:30 a.m., Nexora's board announced that Chad Ingram was stepping down as CEO, effective immediately. No press conference, no farewell video, just a quiet 2-sentence statement posted to their LinkedIn page, with the comments section locked. Melinda, the HR director who had handed me my severance file, was also gone by end of day. Leo, the engineer who once claimed my work as his own, deleted all his recent posts and set his social profiles to private. Word spread quickly that the company had suspended him pending internal review. The same people who'd looked through me just weeks earlier were now scrambling to rewrite their alliances. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on building. At Celix, I worked with a team that respected my experience, not resented it. Our engineering meetings weren't political war zones. People asked questions. They listened. And when I spoke, they took notes, not credit. One afternoon, I walked into a strategy session and found a quote of mine printed on the whiteboard. Innovation is what you create in silence. Legacy is what remains when they try to erase you. I hadn't even remembered saying it. By Thursday, TechCon Global invited me to deliver the opening keynote at their annual conference. The theme? Resilience in the face of corporate erasure. The email began. Your story has become something larger than just a tech dispute. It's become a warning and a beacon. And it wasn't just the media. My inbox flooded with messages from women, older professionals, and engineers of color, people who knew what it meant to be the foundation others stood on, but never got to stand in the spotlight. One woman wrote, I started documenting everything after hearing about you. Not out of fear, out of pride. Another said, they called me outdated. I just filed my first patent. That was the real victory. Not the licensing deal, not the title, not even the public redemption. It was knowing that I had shifted the conversation. That now, when someone tried to erase the person behind the product, they'd have to think twice. Because the industry had changed. Because I had made sure of it. Exactly 1 year to the day after Nexora sunset my role, I stood on stage at TechCon Global, under spotlights that once seemed reserved for other people. The auditorium was packed. Rows of engineers, product leads, journalists, and venture capitalists filled every seat. It wasn't just a conference. It was the conference, and now I was opening it. A screen behind me read, Dr. Scarlett Hale, Chief Technology Advisor, Silix Data, inventor of the Hale Distributed Framework, HDF. I took a slow breath, looked out at the audience, and began. A year ago, I was asked to hand over my keycard and walk away. I wasn't angry, not at first. I was tired of being the smartest voice in a room where no one looked my way. Tired of pretending that experience was somehow a liability. And most of all, tired of being treated like innovation had an expiration date. You could hear a pin drop. I walked them through the architecture of my framework, the innovations that came from decades of quiet, focused work. But I also told the truth, the human part, about what it meant to be erased, about how silence can either break you or make you more dangerous than ever. Afterward, a line formed, dozens of people wanting a handshake, a signature, a word of advice. But one stood out. A woman no older than 30 nervously handed me a sleek, minimalist envelope. Inside was an invitation. Women in Tech Leadership Summit 2026 keynote topic, Owning Your Intellectual Value, How One Signature Almost Erased an Industry Icon. She said softly, Your story changed how I document everything I create. I just filed my first provisional patent last week. I felt my throat tighten. I nodded, smiled, and replied, You don't just protect your work for yourself. You do it so no one else gets erased the way we did. That evening, as I returned to my office at Celix, my assistant met me with a wide-eyed look. There's something you need to see, she said. She handed me a glossy printout of a breaking story. Nexora board accepts full licensing agreement with Silix Data, names Dr. Hale as sole inventor. I stared at it for a moment. It was surreal. Just a year ago, they tried to bury my name. Now it was on every headline. But the real twist? Nexora had implemented a company-wide overhaul of its innovation recognition policies, modeled directly after the one I created at Celix. The board that once allowed my erasure now had no choice but to mirror my legacy to survive. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't even feel triumphant. I felt steady, whole, because I had reclaimed something no one had the right to take. My name, my work, my place. And through it, I'd created something larger than myself, a blueprint for others. A warning for the powerful, a promise for the underestimated. Moral of the story? Innovation doesn't care about your age. Genius doesn't fade with time. And legacy? Legacy is what survives the silence.